I'm Beth Schiller, and you're at Dandelion Spring Farm on the Ridge Road in Bowdoinham. And I've been farming in Maine for almost 20 years. But I bought this property in Bowdoinham and moved my business here in 2018. We grow around 10 acres of produce each year, and half of our crops are typically sold at farmers markets and half to restaurants, both in the Camden-Rockland area and in the Portland area. Our crops are all certified organic by MOFGA, and about a quarter of our business typically is salad greens. And then we also raise quite a few herbs. And then beyond that, we have a pretty full gamut. We don't grow sweet corn. I often tell people we grow everything but sweet corn, but there's a wide diversity that makes up the rest of our mix. And we do have year-round production, and we sell year-round. So here at Dandelion Spring, we like to intercrop as much as possible. We're trying to play the balance between being a production farm that is growing year-round and also making the use of all of our space and cater to the crops that are a little bit different. So here we have spigarello, which is an Italian type of kale, and it is underseeded currently with some beets. And in the winter, the space is typically filled with spinach and other greens. And one reason why we picked the spigarello is that there is a lot of curly kale on the market. There is so much beautiful curly kale, even being grown in Bowdoinham, that we wanted something a little bit different for the chefs. So we're constantly playing the fine line between growing crops that we're inspired by and other people are inspired by, but also thinking about the bottom line and the dollar return per square foot. So I feel really fortunate that the people in Maine are reaching out to farms more and more than they have in the past to find food close to home. But my crop profile is definitely geared toward chefs. So with our transition with the global pandemic, it means that there has to be a little bit more marketing, which is, I will say, hard, because the conversations we can have at market are really different this year than in the past when people could have a sensual experience. Now we wait in line and we move through. So there's some challenges. This is another example of our multi-crop house production, which a lot of farms in Bowdoinham are doing really successfully and are really inspiring to me and to others. Tomatoes are an important summer crop to us, but then come winter, this house will also be full of salad mix because we've adapted our diets to want salad mix all the time. We've got 5 greenhouses that are in production, and then the rest of our space is outdoors. This is Lulu. She is on all farm tours. I have been farming for a while, but I've only had 2 full seasons here in Bowdoinham. And so I'm still getting to know this soil and this space. And as a farmer that follows organic practices, I feel like one of the highlights of organic farming is that it's about building soil. So a big part of our spring season, the last 2 years, we've added at this point probably 60,000 pounds of rock minerals and lime as we're trying to rejuvenate the soil that, from my understanding, hadn't been farmed since 1940. So we're excited to see our crops get better and better over time. This is Paul Robeson. This is another example of how we exist at Dandelion Spring. I am in many ways a liberal arts market gardener, and I like to select some varieties because I appreciate their stories and more of their well-roundedness. I guess it's similar to talking about the spigarello. Some of these are varieties that a typical market farmer may not pick because they don't produce as heavily or they're not as consistent. But I appreciate other parts of them, and I appreciate that, like, most seeds have stories. All seeds have stories. And Paul Robeson is someone who is very fitting for this time. He was a bit of a revolutionary and also an opera singer. And he has some really lovely tomatoes named after him. This is a great example between the Paul Robeson is an heirloom variety, which means that, it's been selected over time for certain characteristics, perhaps of flavor and other elements that someone might like, but it hasn't been, I guess, to speak very broadly, scientifically, is manipulated as, say, Frederick here, and which, look how robust this stem is. It's almost like Frederick has been drinking a super smoothie all day, every day, whereas Paul Robeson might be snacking on a carrot once in a while. They're both tomatoes. They're both going to have really delicious, wonderful fruit. But, this is something that is probably going to give us more fruit per plant than this guy. I frankly think this guy might taste a little better. And so it's shows the clear difference between plants that have been selected for hybrid vigor versus plants that have been selected for historical value and flavor. We do have the names, and it's part just to kind of help cement in our mind as we watch the plants grow which ones are doing better than others. So if we choose to make some selection based on how they are as plants, then we have a little bit more of an idea come winter, because we compulsively take notes, but never enough notes. And it's also helpful, I think, just for the farm crew. I have a really fantastic farm crew. Many of them are pretty novice farmers, so I think it's good for them to constantly be seeing and learning the difference between the varieties too. This space has some herbs that have returned from last year, and this is sage that is flowering. Currently about a quarter of our business is salad greens, and about 15% of our business is herbs, both annual and perennial. And I really love the herbs, so it's part of what I look forward to increasing in terms of our production. And I've been a little bit slow to establish them here. I'm reminding myself that we're still very new to this land, and as I get to know the space to figure out where on this farm do we want to be situating our perennials, I really look forward to manifesting that vision. I think in terms of plants that I work with, when I harvest the herbs, I just realize that I feel the happiest, and I really identify that my crew seems to have different conversations. Often when we're in the herbs, I think that plants that are being picked very intentionally, both for culinary purposes and which we speak maybe a little bit more about their medicinal values, just inspire our bodies and our minds in different ways. And so I look forward to growing more of them. Yeah, so right in front of us we have some sage, and in the culinary world we sell sage more in the fall than we do other times of year for certain, because people really identify it as being delicious with winter squash, which is another crop that we love here. But in terms of thinking about sage in other ways, I really like to just remind us that when we talk about someone who's wise, we often say they're very sage, and that comes from somewhere, and that, this plant having that name, one could say, is perhaps good for our mind. And another thing that I really like about having the sage at this stage is that the bees really enjoy it. I think it's really nice to have a diversity of plants that are pollinating at different times, and for pollinators to come and enjoy. And the sage is one of them. So at this stage, we sell a little bit to chefs. We sell a few bunches at market, but we mainly enjoy it. And in the process, as this will get cut back, and in the field we do have a new batch of sage that will be a little bit more leafy and robust for us to harvest this fall, and we'll get some good growth off of this too. And we'll just see how long it continues to provide for us before we till it under and refresh it. This is my back field, and so we were just in the front field, which is kind of near the road, and then we took a short walk down a narrower open space, and then there is this lovely acreage in the back that is open. And when I moved to Bowdoinham, many people assumed that I was bringing my business to the bay, and this is clearly not the bay. This is the ridge road, and there are some ridges, but I love it. I have several different soil types. And again, with the vantage point of being here just a couple years, it's been really interesting to get to know this ridgy backfield and feel out where's the frost settling the fastest and what fields are drying sooner. We have a lot of tall grass because we have a lot of bobolinks here, and without having any livestock that's pushing us to mow this grass, we're letting it stay tall for a little bit longer until the bobolinks fledge from their nests. The bird habitat and the diversity of birds here in general is pretty astounding, and so I really appreciate that we can try to foster that habit as much as our gardens. And I like to joke that in the early summer that we really just grow white fabric, which is Not true. Under all of this white fabric, there's a lot of arugula and lettuce mix, some more sprouting broccoli and squash and cucumbers, lots of crops. We do have a lot of beetles, and we do grow using organic practices, and so this cover is what saves us from the beetles to a certain extent, and also keeps our crops a little bit warmer during those cooler spring nights. I love looking out and seeing in the back there's a rectangle of space that's a little bit more of a blue-green, and that is our garlic seed. Both our garlic that we're going to harvest and sell this year and our seed for coming years. A little bit of it came from Watley Farm here in Bowdoinham, so Bowdoinham genetics are carrying on. This is a space that I also look forward to developing, and who knows, maybe open farm day 10 years from now, those back ridges will be covered with fruit trees. We'll see. I think one thing that's really important to me as a farmer is being a leader to my community, but to my staff in a way that can show farming as a sustainable lifestyle. So I, as a farmer, am trying to figure out how do I continue to pay my staff a living wage and have them work sustainable hours, but also figure out how do we charge the true value for food. And that's not a conversation that we've been having publicly yet. And particularly with economic sensitivity, I don't know how to have that conversation, but I challenge us as a community to start to talk about farming sustainably for land and for people. Well, I think it's really wonderful that Bowdoinham is a town that supports so many farms, and I feel like there is not a saturation point yet for growing food in Maine to feed Mainers. We still have a ways to go, but we can do it. And I think we can be a really amazing example for the rest of the country about how we can be feeding ourselves. And Bowdoinham is definitely a star in that regard here in the state of Maine.